or something.
And now, gentlemen, we should be live. So welcome to the podcast.
To the Sales Slap Podcast, where we hit you with the hard truths, bold strategies, and expert insights you need to master the art of selling. And who's leading the charge? Meet your hosts, Rick Denley, Simon Hares, and Scott Donald. Get ready for real talk, expert advice, and game-changing strategies. Because in sales, you don't just play, you slap. Let's dive in.
Yes, let's dive in and welcome everybody to the Sales Slap Podcast. You know your hosts right now, and we've got an incredible guest today. I want to introduce you all to Daniel Burns. Give a wave, Daniel. How are you doing today? Daniel Burns, hey, best-selling author, ICF certified performance coach, award-winning inspirational speaker and coach, podcast host, not today, you're a guest today, personal trainer and sales leader with 25 plus years of international sales and management experience. Daniel's coaching brand is called Best Version of Me, BVME, and his mission is to create his own best version while helping others create their best versions. Daniel is passionate about helping others transform themselves and transform their sales results. We're thrilled to have you on today, Daniel. Welcome.
Yay! Hey, I am super excited to be here. I don't know if I ever planned on saying this, but for a Friday, I am ready to get slapped around.
Nice.
So,
Get
Rick,
ready.
You're at the right place.
It's great to meet you, Rick. It's great to meet you, Scott and Simon. Good to see you again.
It's great to see you again. And what's so special about this, Dan, is that you're our very, very first guest.
Yes.
So we are really kicking off with a bang with having you here. So we are so excited. And it's really nice to be able to give back to you and do a bit of showcasing of you and everything that you do as well.
Can I ask you a question, Simon?
Go on.
And you have to be honest with me. Okay? Do you really want to know what I have to say today? Or is this just an elaborate plot to get me to send you more Canadian treats? Is that... I'm okay either way. I'm okay either way.
I heard about the treats. I heard it was great. I got them covered on the tea, and you covered the rest of it. We'll have to get them those ketchup chips, and we'll be.
Scott's got me the hat.
Scott's got you the hat because
some of you's got to get me residency. I'm nearly there because I'm in Florida right now, so I'm almost there.
Well, you can swing up our way, no problem. Yeah. We're welcome to have you. So, welcome to the show. Today's topic is rather interesting. A couple of areas, and you know, this word didn't even exist before, other than maybe going back to our cartoon days. Now, I won't talk about that too much, but ghosting and tire kickers, a couple of interesting topics within the sales stages that we come across. And everybody on this podcast now is in sales, been in sales, leading sales, coaching sales, but this is a relatively new term as well to us going forward. So just a quick roundtable for a minute on the topics of ghosting and tire kicking here. Scott, what do you got for us? What are you thinking?
I think it's all part of the trend where decision makers are bringing salespeople into the process, into the process later and later. I think as a result of lack of training, poor compensation plans, salespeople are becoming less trustworthy, and as a result, decision makers are bringing us in later, and then ghosting us during the process. So I think we need to find a way to really kind of reconnect with people and elevate the professionalism and trustworthiness of what we're doing.
All right, beautiful. Simon, first thoughts on this topic?
Well, it's an evergreen subject, ghosting. It goes on and on. It's as common as seeing on LinkedIn, cold calling is dead. It's always going to be out there. And I suppose it's something that people will always do. But we need to be aware that ultimately you've got the tire kickers, which is that first stage, if you will, of wasting our time. And, all we want them to do is stop kicking the tires and go and chase some parked cars if they're going to do that. But then following that, if they still want to move on, they're going to ghost us a bit later, or ghosting can be completely separate. But it's definitely a subject that lots of people talk about. And I know that on training courses that I run, it's often the most common subject. How do you deal with the time wasters and how do you stop people ghosting? So, let's talk.
And it ties back into technology as well. The better or more advanced technology gets, the more we can hide behind it as well, which is a large part of that ghosting and tire kicking. Now on to our guest, Daniel. What are your first thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I gave this a little bit of thought, and I've got a dirty little secret that I have to share. I thought about myself as a buyer, and it's hard to admit, but guys, I am a tire kicker. I am a tire kicker right now as we speak. There
And
are
I thought the jacket was bad enough.
somebody sold me on the jacket, right? That's a good salesperson to get me to
The
buy
jacket's
this.
similar to mine, Simon. What are you saying?
I think Daniel's a little more crisp.
Yeah, we didn't ask you, Scott. All right, Daniel, go ahead.
But here's what I'm thinking. There's things that are on my list right now. I just moved back to Nova Scotia, so I've got to get a home. I've got things that I'm looking at constantly, like a red light sauna, because I'm going somewhere for that therapy. I'd like to do it in-house. I want a new set of custom golf clubs. That's on my list. And if the company Coach sends me any type of newsletter with more Coach sneakers, there's a good chance I'm going to pull the trigger. So when I think about it, there's all these things. It's easier today than ever for us to have a constant wish list, constantly mentally kind of spending our money. But the question really is, I think, what's going to move me from interested to committed? And I think that is a shift that a good salesperson can come along and help people go from interested to committed. So I'm expecting at the end of this podcast to have a flood of emails about red light saunas coming into my inbox to help me through this process, right?
I didn't
my
want to
phone's
say anything
listening
about the
right
red light
now.
sauna, but
My phone's listening, so I'm going to get all the ads as well now. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel, for that. So, but you're right. And you know what? You're talking, everybody's touched on the different stages of the sales process, as Scott said. But it's interesting to me that really the ghosting piece initially starts off in the qualifying stage, doesn't it? It's at the very beginning. How are we getting hold of what we think could potentially be good clients for us, strong clients for us? And that qualifying piece, and I get asked all the time, Rick, what's the most important sales stage? Well, they're all important. But if you're not qualifying correctly up front, you're going to waste your time the rest of your sales process, aren't you? And we all know that. But qualifying is where the ghosting starts. Right away, you're trying to pursue an opportunity, a client, a customer that you think will be good for you long term, and you're not getting a hold of them. Why is that happening, guys? Jump in. And of course, we're here to give them the skills, tools, and knowledge necessary to help overcome these challenges in sales.
what do you think, Dan?
I think there's one thing that I would add to that, which is an important element to qualifying, is timing. I think that we need to stay with our prospects sometime over a long period of time. And it really depends on the industry that you're in and how big is the ticket price on something you're selling, because sometimes the sales cycle is quite long.
Dan, are you saying that the sales cycle's tied to the dollar amount a lot of times? If we've got a larger dollar amount, the sales cycle tends to be longer?
At times. So I think the timing of things is important, because I can be interested. I can be kind of kicking tires. I may ghost you a little bit, but if the timing comes up that it becomes super important to me and I'm at the stage where I need to make a decision, then that timing really matters. And will you be there when the timing hits? And a great salesperson, I think, stands in the ready, knows which levers to push, and is there to time when the clients are ready.
Absolutely. Simon,
of course,
what do you think?
from that point as well, being the timing side, you can end up with tire kickers who just end up wasting your time, of course. But it is still important to give them a great experience, because people have different points when they're ready to buy. They could be at the moment presenting tire kicker, but they could just be searching the market and they're not ready to go forward yet for maybe at least another 6 months, because maybe a product or a service isn't ready to move forward. So you could have that. But when we start to think about what these people are doing, you also don't know who they're having coffee with. So if you give them a really bad experience and you start thinking this is a tire kicker and you shut down, a prospect can feel that. So therefore, they're probably going to think and say things to their friends like, yeah, they were really friendly, but when they suddenly realized that we weren't going to buy from them, they kind of shut down. The kind of tricks that people in retail do sometimes, where they realize they're not going to get the sale today, so they move away and they become quite closed. So the timing aspect, I think, is really important. What about you, Scott?
The timing aspect is really interesting. And I think part of what makes me think about this, and I'm going to go back to my point about salespeople and our conduct, and I'm referring to this Daniel Pink, To Sell Is Human, and the word cloud. And why I'm bringing this up is that, so timing is interesting, but so Simon, you described this from the point of view of the buyer's experience or the seller's experience with the buyer and shutting down because they didn't think it was going to be worth their while in the moment. But I'm thinking about, if we're always selling, if we're always trying to push it based on our timing, that's a turnoff to the buyer, to the decision maker. And my sense is that a good chunk of the times that people are being ghosted as because of negative experiences with salespeople who are pushing their timing and their agenda versus the customer's timing and agenda.
Absolutely. And of course, that agenda they're pushing is based on their targets, because all they're thinking about is when the deadline for their target is. So they've got to get the sale in then. Right. So they're going down.
100%. That's 100%.
So a longer term type thinking is good as well, and not pushing away tire kickers necessarily, because it might not be their time right now, but it doesn't mean that it won't be soon. I want to give you a great example of that. I wish I had the clip to run it, and probably copyrights, I couldn't anyways. But there's a great commercial, and there's a very young boy, and it's set in a little bit of olden times, let's say, and he comes up and he's looking through the window of a car dealership, and he's looking in at these beautiful cars, and he comes inside, and the older sales guy looks at him and goes, what do you want, kid? Well, I love these cars and things. Well, he doesn't even have a driver's license yet. So do you want to truly call that a tire kicker? Sure. The older sales guy shoos him away, and off he goes. Next day he comes back. He's looking in the window again, and there's a different salesperson this time in the car dealership who opens the door outside and said, "What are you doing?" Kid says, "Well, I'm looking at the cars. I like them." He says, "Well, come on in." And he invites him in and brings him into the dealership. Happened to be a Porsche dealership. Yes. And he brings him in and invites him
Got
in.
that one in.
And even he's let him touch the car. He says, "Well, get in." And the little kid's eyes get so big and so on. He says, "What do you mean get in?" "Yeah, get in, check it out." He knows that even though the timing's not right now, obviously the timing will be right one day. Then jump forward about 15 years, that individual doing well, graduated school, in his own business, so on, comes back into the dealership, same sales guy, happened to be a bit older, obviously, recognizes him, thanks him, of course, buys the car from him because he gave him the time, the respect that was necessary then for the future. So yeah, tire kickers aren't always good to blow off, let's say, but it's all in the timing. I agree. Daniel, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking the other thing that comes to my mind is fit. So you may have somebody that's interested. They may be actively engaged, and they're looking for a certain number of things. They've got their checklist of the must-haves. And maybe your product checks some of those boxes, but do you really have a fit with that client? Are you able to fulfill all the things on their wish list? And a lot of the times we get down the road and 3 of the boxes are checked, but a couple real important ones, they're not really checked, but I need to make my quota. So this is what I've got to, this is what I've got to work with, right? So I'm going to kind of try to make those boxes fit, even though that really isn't a great prospect for me, but I'm trying to make something out of nothing. So I think fit is the other thing that comes to mind for me.
I think that's really very, very valuable, that fit piece, because as well, you're doing it because you want to make your quota. But of course, from a management and leadership point of view, we also have to be thinking about how we manage people who are trying to deal with these tire kickers, who are actually giving time to them and saying, the Rick example, they may not be ready today, but they might be ready in, 6 months' time or a year's time. But the manager and leader then says, you haven't got time to be doing that. You need to get the numbers on the board now. So how do you think, Dan, from a leadership point of view, how do you think managers can better manage people who have to deal with tire kickers?
Yeah, so a couple of things come to mind. One of my favorite concepts, Simon, as a coach is helping people, salespeople, understand their HPAs. And this was a concept I picked up in Australia. And your HPAs are your highest payoff activities. And do you really know what's driving your business? So there's a lot of things we could do. There's a lot of things we do, but are they the right things to really drive business through your pipeline? And when you look at your day, your week, and your month, and you do an audit, how much time are you really spending on those HPAs to drive your business to get the actual result? A lot of the time, I see salespeople get pulled off into the weeds. They're working on things that aren't important. They're majoring in the minors. And that is why they're not hitting their numbers. So
I like this point, Daniel.
So do I. I think this is our tip of the day, guys.
I think it is.
I really do. To understand your HPAs, your highest paying activities.
And from an individual standpoint, but from a leadership standpoint, which is always what I like to focus on, Daniel, as everybody knows, that's good for the leaders to be able to support that and keep reinforcing it and even ask the team, hey, can we identify what your HPAs are for this week? And I want you to focus on those. I'm giving you permission to focus on those. Forget about the admin and the other things because they're not high on the priority list. As a leader, I'm going to make sure that you're on those HPAs because those will bring the greatest results. So maybe jointly, I mean, you're giving them the confidence to do so and the permission to stick to them as a leader. If you identify them with them, put them up on the whiteboard. I always had a big whiteboard in my office and everybody knew what my priorities of the week were. So I love that, Daniel. That's a great thought. I think
that's a moment where we've almost kind of peaked on that subject, because I think we should move that nicely into kind of the next part, which is the ghosting side, because I don't think there's anything better that we can add, any of us, apart from that HPA. Well, I think that should drop the mic moment there.
I do. So it's a drop the mic moment, but I have a question.
Yeah.
Why? So Daniel, why do you feel that reps, and I guess to Rick's point, leaders don't understand what their HPAs are? You know, so Simon helped me with a gig a few months ago on time management, and of course, there's a lot of discussion about the sales process and understanding who your ideal customers are. But is it all those things? Is it because they don't really understand? Like, maybe I'll back up. What is it about the state of sales today that sales leaders and sales reps don't understand what their HPAs are? And then we can move, because I think this is worth unpacking a bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think some understand what it is, but they're not clear on it. And even when you're clear on what your HPAs are, it's very tempting to work on other things that keep you busy instead of doing some of the HPAs, because the HPAs, sometimes it's a little confronting. And I can give you 2 examples of how my HPAs selling were completely different in completely different industries. So the very first sales job that I had was selling photocopiers, right? Very transactional selling world. So my HPAs in that industry was, I better be out making cold calls. And if I did every single day consistently, I performed. The math was astonishing. They told me, make this many calls, you'll generate this much business. And it really worked. The only time I would take a break from prospecting is when I had to actually sign a deal to get to my numbers. But if I wasn't doing those 2 things enough, I would never make my numbers. If I look at healthcare sales, it's a completely different picture. So my team right now is out making the cold calls. I don't want to be out there generating leads. That's what my team is doing. The way I'm helping and supporting them actually is by quotes, by asking customers to buy, to making sure they've got all the information they need to make a decision. And I'm helping get that in front of our customers so that they can say yes.
And
then our team keeps filling.
You're aligning as well people's roles and their strengths as well within the organization, aren't you?
Yes.
For the HPA. And I just want to add one thing, and then Scott, I know you want to jump in. HPAs exist everywhere in our life. And as coaches, we know that as well, beyond the business world. You should have these HPAs for every aspect, whether it's in your physical attributes, where you're looking to improve yourself to become the best version of yourself, which Daniel's strong on as well, or in the business world. You probably have some personal ones to be working out and seeing what goals you want to achieve and what are your high priorities for the week, just as you do in the business world. Is that the case, Daniel?
I'd love to jump on that because I'm super passionate about this. I think the word, salesperson, there's two parts to that, right? There's sales. So we could look at the important things for selling. Do you have all the skills? Can you do a demo? Can you close all the techniques and things? There's days worth of training to dive into that side. But I think the thing that we forget about too is the person. That is the other part of the equation. And you don't separate the two. I'd love to say I come to work and I leave all that stuff at home, but we bring it into work. So what are we doing on the personal side to help us reach our goals, our mindset, all the things that life throws at us with kids and bills and, retirement and all those things. And then how about right up here, all the feelings, the emotions that I have throughout the day? It's not popular for sales managers or for companies to look at how can we help people with the people part. But I think that's critical to performance. Yeah. If we try to separate the two, I think it falls apart.
And that is the essence of this podcast, because the Sales Slap podcast is sales, leadership, and the people element. So when you are building all of those people elements, you have to be understanding, how to build your own resilience. But maybe if you look at the highest paying activity, you have to identify what your lowest paying activity is, which is probably stuff that's right in your comfort zone and you just go to make yourself look busy, which actually leaders, managers, and even the sales professional themselves needs to change their discipline to move away from that, to focus on the higher paid activities. But of course, I think from another point of view, it would be important for us to say that whilst we've got these HPAs, we have to be mindful that you can't do HPAs 100% of the time, because you probably end up burning out. You've got to have some of the other stuff. It's a bit like when you read lots of books, you can read all these different types of books and you think, this was a really, really heavy book and I really enjoyed it, but it was really heavy. Now I need something a bit lighter so I can find my way again. And I think sometimes there's a value in those middle to lower activities, which actually will make the higher paid ones even better.
Well, I'll just add to that. So, Daniel, I love your comment about people, and I'm thinking about like mental health and positive work cultures and all those things. But I think that part of what we're getting onto now is getting, again, this human side of things. And, we are, so from a time management or HPA perspective, there's a lot of science that says our brains can only work for so long at a high level, and we need a break, whether it's a 5-minute break to go get a cup of coffee or going for a quick walk or whatever those things are. So I love Simon's point about how we manage. We can't be on 10 hours a day straight without taking a break. Yeah. And I wonder if sometimes the challenge with HPA type ideas is that we're rewarding certain behavior that either isn't in alignment with what an HPA is, or there's lots of people, salespeople quitting. There's lots of people jumping to different companies. I think we also have this burnout notion. And if all of these things are driving certain kinds of behaviors, I think that, to me, if the compensation and the sales leaders are driving certain behaviors and certain demands, and that's resulting in salespeople behaving in a certain way, do we not agree? And I want to go back to Daniel on this, that can then contribute to why buyers out there are tire kicking and ghosting, because of the way so many sales professionals conduct themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Scott. And I know that, when you look at it, it comes down to the salespeople as well. I mean, think about, like we just said, there's personal HPAs and then there's business APAs. If personal APAs are for me to go to the gym every day and work out, that's great. But I can't do the same exercise over and over and over, right? Because as Simon said, I'm going to burn out from that. And that's not the right approach as well. And we've got to be careful when we try and take that type of mentality into the workplace. Daniel?
Yeah, so I would say too with HPAs, what's important is to make sure that you're putting enough time into the things that are going to get results so that you have more time for yourself. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with the term time confetti.
Share with us.
Yeah, so it's a concept that I heard about that it used to be before we would have more extended periods of time. We might have an hour, we might have, 2 hours at the end of a day.
Yeah.
And now because of Zoom and all these things that are going on, our time blocks are much smaller. So we may get a half-hour window in between our appointments. And the question with time confetti is, what do you do to fill your cup when you've only got 15 or 20 minutes? And do you know the things that could potentially charge you up so that you're not burning out? And that is a challenge that we've never really had before that we need to think about. And what's going to give you energy and what's going to fill you back up and what's going to restore the batteries? And people haven't taken the time to really sit and think about what does energize them.
Can this be the second tip of the day? Because I love this. This is right in my wheelhouse. So I'm going to vote that this is our second tip of the day if we're able to do that.
Motion passed.
Well, I got to get it up now. I didn't know we were having 2 tips of the day. Thanks.
We've got 2 tips. It's
on a
great.
Friday.
You know what?
It's a 2-tip podcast.
When you bring in high quality guests like Daniel, you can't limit yourself to 1 tip of the day.
Well, you're naturally greedy anyway, so it's fine. Overfilling your plate at the buffet, as always. Shall we talk about ghosting, chaps? Because we promised ghosting. Dan, why do they do it?
Well, I thought of the term ghosting. I got a question for you guys. Do you believe in ghosts?
Oh.
Well, yes, absolutely. 100%.
You do.
Spirits wandering around between zones. I can't describe it, but sure.
Okay.
Sure,
He sees dead people.
I'm not sure that I do, because I don't know that I've seen the evidence so that I'm convinced that there's ghosts. And I wonder with sales, if we have sometimes the evidence that somebody is truly a prospect. And I think that there's a distinction that is missed. Is this person a suspect or are they a prospect? And there's a division between those two things where we have to qualify the person to become an actual prospect. Just because they've reached out to us, just because their email has been tapped and they've had some sort of response to it, or they've read something that we sent them and our CRM tells us that, does not mean that they are a prospect that you should be spending your time on.
A qualified prospect.
If they ghost you, that could well happen because you haven't seen the evidence that they are actually solidly interested. They haven't booked an appointment. They haven't done a demo or any of the things to tell you they are truly there.
It's a great point, Daniel. And again, it's technology. It's so easy just to get on and DM somebody in that and say, hey, I'm interested and so on. They're not even picking up the phone. Can't believe I just did that. How old are you? That they're picking up the phone and talking to people, but they're even, it's just easy to DM and type somebody and so on. It doesn't mean it. So this brings us back to that qualifying stage. Thanks for bringing us back there, Daniel. I love that. Qualifying is so important now. Asking the correct questions regarding their intent, their budget, their timing, what the burning bridge is. Is this really a prospect that we should be pursuing? Or, as the other gentlemen here have said today, are we creating that situation ourselves because we're so hungry for a sale? Are we blinding ourselves with the fact because we have to meet quota? Because, by the way, it's the end of the month today, isn't it? And it is. And we're trying desperately to do things, and we're confusing ourselves between qualifying clear prospects.
So I'm putting my hand up. I'm not sure why I'm doing that. So Daniel, I know that you do coaching as well. And so what I find interesting is that I've worked with, salespeople and tech startups, and I'll hear something like, well, I emailed Simon and he didn't get back to me, so he's clearly not interested. And I wonder if this whole definition of ghosting has to be expanded in the sense that just because you reached out to somebody the one time they didn't get back to you, doesn't mean they're not interested. It just means maybe, as you said at the top, it's maybe a timing issue, or maybe there are some other things. So, what are your thoughts on this whole notion of the definition of ghosting and what salespeople expect from a prospect that they haven't properly qualified or connected with?
Yeah, I think expectations are off. I think there was a stat of, you had to get in front of a prospect up to 8 different times and hear
8 no's
no,
kind of thing.
and you've got to go out and collect your no's. So that's something to always keep in mind. But one of the questions I think is important too to ask is that person looking for a supplier or are they looking for a partner? And which are you? Because a supplier is somebody who's very transactional. And if you're in that business like I was in with photocopiers, you better get used to being ghosted and having tire kickers and that being the expectation.
Yeah.
But
it's down to the value that the buyer sees in you, because ultimately with a photocopier salesperson, it's about a long-term relationship because you want a long contract. But the value that the person sees in the product is not that high because ultimately it's just a photocopier. And unless they pride themselves on a quality printed output, so maybe they're a law firm that needs to have that quality printed output, it can't just go on, 80 GSM, it's got to be really good. So we've got to think about the relationship between the value I put on what you're doing versus the relationship. Because if I was a recruitment agency, for example, the recruitment agency means that the value I put on what you're selling, which is people, is going to be much higher because those people are making me money, saving me money, or reducing risk in my business. But the relationship could be with the recruitment agency very, very transactional. But if we build it so we've got a preferred supplier list where they do become that partner, then that commitment is much longer.
Great point, Simon. I want to jump in here. We've got some viewers live with us. Patrick Tinney here from Bancroft, Ontario. Patrick says,
hey,
he's jumping in. We love Patrick. He says brand alignment. And he says when you're on straight commission, every minute is an HPA.
Yeah.
Patrick always comes at it from the dollars and cents. We love that. We've got Bob Geniak as well jumping in from Oakville, Ontario, a good friend of mine. Thanks for being on today.
Hello, Bob.
Also. So listen, we want to wrap things up, gentlemen, because we've brought great value here today to our viewers, and we appreciate everybody being on board. We're going to do a quick roundtable. Any final thoughts on this? And then we'll wrap up so that our viewers, salespeople, sales leaders can get out there and do what they do best. So Simon, over to you on the topic of ghosting and tire kickers. Anything you want to wrap up with?
I think it's really important to, and Dan touched on this with the old metrics of keeping going, collecting your nose, I think was the phrase you used.
Yeah.
Personally, my number is 14 touch points. If someone tells me it's 12 or it's 8, mine is 14. If you tell me it's 12, I'll just go a bit further. But the real thing for me is, and this is about putting a stake in the heart of the ghost. Once you get to that point where you've done everything you can to find that person out, my point here is that I will send them any form of outreach that says, I've tried to reach you on a number of occasions. You would have received these. It's clear you're not happy to move forward at any reason. If you did want to, we're happy to talk. But at this stage, I'm going to close your inquiry. And by saying the words, I am going to close your inquiry, says to that person, I'm not just sat here waiting for your call. I have a value as a person as well.
Yeah. And
the funny thing is, what happens is a lot of the time, and when I say to people this, they come back and they go, do you know what? They always come back. They go, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We've been busy, because they've got other things to do.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the conversation's up again. So I think it's really nice to wrap that out with that. What about you, Scott? Last points?
I feel like all I'm going to do here is echo Simon, because you never can go wrong echoing Simon. But Simon, to me, what I know. I'm a big believer in the synergy between being a good human, which is part of our discussion last time, and following a really defined sales process. And what Simon just described, like listen, we're all big fans of Simon. Why? Because Simon's genuine and he's energetic and he's fun and he's a good dude. And it sounds like he also follows a very defined sales process. And I think my feeling is that as sales leaders, if you're continually working with your team to reinforce and support the behaviors of being a good human first, combined with having an efficient and effective sales process, you're going to minimize the likelihood of people ghosting you and tire kicking.
Great point.
Excellent.
Great point.
Appreciate that. That's great. Daniel, your final word. And again, thanks for being on the show today.
Have you got a book as well that you're reading?
I've got 3 books here, Simon.
Let's have it.
What's the book of the week? What have we
got a book
got?
of the week. What have we got?
I've got Selling in a Post-Trust World by Larry Levine.
Nice.
There, yeah.
I've got, and that's for sales. I've got End Boring by Ivan Juanes Ruiz. It's
Nice.
about powerful presenting. And then I've got the Workshop Survival Guide. So for me, being a better facilitator and a better group coach. So
Yeah.
I'm reading all of those to kind of round out all the areas.
Did you
That's
see how
great.
did you see how excited Simon got when you brought up the book?
I know. I think it's something I've missed or something I've missed. It'd be great, Dan. Could you just hold those books up so that people can see the spines? Because people might do a screen grab so that they can see those. That would be great. That would be brilliant. Thank you so much. So that people can get those. Marvelous. Larry Levine is going to be so happy. He's amazing. We love him.
Yeah.
He's going to be on here. We'll get him here. It's all good.
So let me give you my final 3 tips on ghosting.
Go on.
There's 3 things that come to mind. 1, salespeople, be empathetic. I think sometimes we think a whole lot is going on in the minds of our prospects, but really there's a lot going on behind the scenes. They may be ghosting you for a very good reason because something else important is happening in their lives. And it's not all about you. Newsflash. Second one is accountability. Okay. Look in the mirror sometimes, right? It's not always the prospect's fault that they didn't get back to you. Sometimes, come on, we all drop the ball, right? So let's do a post-mortem on how we can get better. The last one, I think, is action. The best way, if you lose a deal, if a client ghosts you, you got to get a new one. So that is a life rewards action. So I think those 3 things, and one final phrase, there's no cheese at the end of the tunnel. That's one I always remember, because sometimes we get into the tunnel and we run around like rats and there's no cheese. And then we do it again and we're like, still no cheese. What?
Amazing.
Experience teaches us, when you get that spidey sense, like, I think this person's a tire kicker, you're probably right. There's no cheese at the end of the tunnel. So don't start running.
Empathy, accountability, and action. 3 amazing finishing points. God,
excellent.
So
Thank
much
you, guys.
today.
We've got timing fit, HPA, sales people to think about, prospecting, and of course, an incredible guest in Daniel Burns. Thanks for being on today. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in as well to watch us live or on the repeat. Make sure to look us up on LinkedIn as well. We're always happy to jump in and help you with your sales and prospecting and leadership days. Thanks everyone for being on.
Thanks.
See you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Daniel.
Today.
Bye.
Charge. Meet your hosts, Rick Denley, Simon Hares, and Scott Donald. Get ready for real talk, expert advice, and game-changing strategies. Because in sales, you don't just play, you slap. Let's dive in.